Everyone to the afternoon of the M365 Spring Admin Workshop Day. We have Max who will be presenting on Credential Theft. It's going to be a really exciting session, really interesting. I am thrilled to watch it and be here to heckle him. Just a few announcements for this meeting. It is being recorded. I ask that you mute yourself unless the presenter asks for open questions or anything like that. If you do have questions or comments, though, otherwise, please raise your hand or put it in the chat. Live captioning is available if you need to turn that on. And then at the end of every session, at the end of this session, we will be calling out a participant for a $25 gift card. And those will be at random for the participants. And then at the end of the conference or the Admin Day event, we will have a grand prize giveaway that'll be selected by survey submissions. Really want to thank our sponsors today for making these events possible. So thank you, everybody. And then for the survey, it is at our website at /survey.
Oh, cool. A Surface Go too.
I know. I always wanted one. I have 10 submissions in.
I don't think that's very fair. Am I going to take over?
Yep, all you, Max. Don't encourage.
So I want to give you guys all a heads up. If you watch the schedule and you pre-selected sessions ahead of time, you may be like, this isn't the session I thought I was coming to right now, and that's fair. We had a last-minute change in presenters, and I'm filling in with a security session here today that normally I do a little bit more prep time for, but we're going to do it a little bit on the fly. It is a great session still, I promise you. It's 2:30 on a Friday afternoon that, if you are here in Minnesota with me, is wonderfully sunny. So let's have a good time together. You know, turn on your video if you want to. Use those Teams reactions to make it so that I don't feel like I'm talking to a blank wall. Let's get into it. So a little bit about me. I'm a senior program manager at Microsoft. Formerly for Microsoft Teams, but now for the Microsoft Higher Education Experiences Group, which is focused on Microsoft Teams, but encompassing all sorts of areas of our Microsoft ecosystem. I've got a few certifications. I actually used to run this shindig before wonderful Michelle took things over, but still help out from time to time. And I've been working with Microsoft Cloud for about 10 years. I've got my contact information up here, but because Teams is Teams, hover over my icon and send me a message if you want to get in touch, or hit me up on Twitter. Email is not going to be your friend, and LinkedIn I'm on once a month. So what should we expect today? We're going to do a dive into Office 365 breaches and how they happen. I'm going to try to keep things fun and entertaining for you. We're not going to give you specific implementation guidance today. I'm not going to tell you, here's the things you need to go do to secure your environment, because that is like a week-long workshop. And last but not least, this is not a lesson on how to hack or breach. Now, because I work for the employer I do work for, I have to give a big, giant disclaimer before we get into the content for today. Oh, I forgot, a fun GIF. Let's go, let's have fun. But before we do, giant disclaimer. Everything I show here is not representative of Microsoft guidance. This is just Max Fritz. I'm showing you how you can potentially secure your environment. The credential theft methods I'm going to mimic are going to be on sample environments with not real data, and under no condition should you ever try to do it on your own. We all clear? Okay. Max didn't teach you how to hack today. That's not what's happening. Okay, let's talk about our current landscape. Attackers have the edge in the current landscape. Now, I'm assuming based on the track that you're in right now, you're probably an IT professional. And out of that, you probably have an interest in, at the minimum, in security, or you actually are working in security. And IT pros, we know you wear multiple hats anyways. So we're comparing hackers versus IT. IT is the defense when it comes down to it, and hackers are the attackers. The hackers are spending, on average, 209 hours trying to get into one system or organization. They spend that time trying to figure out who to target, what types of attacks are going to work best, when they should do it, and how.
Of what our organization needs based on what type of worker that we are using. So again, that use case is the most.
Sorry about that. Muted participant there. Make sure to stay on mute if you, unless you have a question. And if you want to come off mute and ask a question, or raise your hand or put it in the chat, that works. Okay. So they are looking at all these different ways of how they should attack a system. IT, however, doesn't have 209 hours on a regular basis to spend defending their system. IT needs to figure out who is attacking them, what types of attacks are happening, when the attackers are striking, and how often those attacks occur to properly defend themselves. Well, that's not a great use of time. So we have a goal that we should try to achieve together. A lot of IT work is reactive in just tons of studies of what happens in terms of defense. If you put all of your effort into defense against breaches ahead of time, in the pre-breach scenario here, this first column, we're talking about staffing, security products, and maintenance. It's a pretty low cost compared to our other end of the spectrum. If you are trying to mitigate the situation post-breach, you're already going to deal with reputation loss and brand damage, which has a monetary value. We may not know that within IT, but it exists. Litigation costs, lost business and sales, and a plethora of other potential issues that are going to cost time and money, including recovering of systems from IT's perspective, and more and more and more. During the breach, you've obviously got time to discovery, which takes time to figure out that you've been breached, business disruption, and impacted assets. So we want to be in the first column here, and we want to cover everything we can. We know that we're not going to be able to protect against every single breach out there. There's always going to be post-breach situations, especially if you work for a larger organization that is well known. But the more we can handle things in the before breach, the less time and money the organization is going to have to spend, which means we can save that money. Okay, now let's take a look at how breaches occur and the methods we're going to cover today. The methods that we're going to talk about today, and there are a just enormous variety of breach types. But we're going to talk about phishing, including spear phishing, drive-by attacks, password spray and breach replay, social engineering, and sticky notes under keyboards, because you cannot tell me that if I, once COVID's over and I'm allowed to, if I walked into your marketing department and you gave me 5 minutes unrestricted, that I couldn't find that Twitter password under a keyboard or on a whiteboard or something like that. There are so many situations where we are still using old-fashioned, well, it just makes my life easier to store this password here. The number one thing you need to know, though, is identity is the number one key thing, the key vector that we can use to protect ourselves. I may have this in a later slide, but we're gonna do this right here, right now. Does anybody know what percentage of identity-based attacks you can protect if you just simply turn on multi-factor authentication? Put your answer in the chat if you think you know. Based on a study Microsoft did a couple years ago, 99% of attacks that are identity focused could have been prevented with simply multi-factor authentication turned on. So good job to Tommy and Doug. But and Brian, who's at 105%, because multi-factor authentication is pretty good. So we're going to talk about mitigation methods as well, like multi-factor authentication, but just wanted to take a moment for a little audience participation there. So what we need to look at is attack progression and the cost to the organization, which is what you're seeing on the bottom here. So, oh, that slide went way too fast. I don't know what's wrong with this slide. We're just going to skip it over, and we're covering the concepts later anyways. Identity is your control plane. Knowing who is trying to get into the system is extremely important, but making sure that you protect the core asset of the organization, the identity, is the most important part, which is unfortunate because, well, users sometimes bypass security methods. So we need to look at how to enable security methods for users in a way that is unobtrusive and really easy to use for them and makes sense. So how do breaches occur? Well, of course, we've got malware and vulnerabilities. But when we've actually looked at data, this data I believe is from like 2018, but it's still pretty relevant here today, 3 years later. 46% of compromised systems that an attacker gained access to, literally had no malware on them. And 99.9% of exploited vulnerabilities that we see used are used more than a year after a CVE is published. So if you're keeping on top of your security updates and your patching and the fun stuff like that, malware and vulnerabilities just aren't such a big deal anymore. You should be protecting your machines. I'm not saying go turn off Windows Defender and have a fun old day in the wild, but fast and effective phishing attacks are the best way to get into an organization. 23% of recipients open phishing messages, and 11% of them click on attachments. And 50% of those who open and click on the attachments do so within the first hour of receiving the message. It gives you very, 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 very little time to react. So what we need to figure out is how to stop not the phishing attack from coming in. I'm actually going to show you how that's practically impossible, but how to stop it from going any further. So we're going to look at the anatomy of an attack, how attacks happen when they're identity based. And we're going to look at a specific sample. So we're going to start with an attacker. I'm going to be our attacker for the day. My goal is to get large wire transfers or money in any way from that matter from a victim company. I have a specific plan. I'm going to infiltrate some corporate accounts. I'm going to move around the organization. I'm going to learn about the internal processes as silently as I can. I'm then going to use impersonation and social engineering to get someone in finance to agree to push out the transfer. So how am I going to make this happen? Well, I know we've talked a lot about teams today throughout all of the workshops and sessions you've been a part of. Teams is actually pretty good at preventing these sorts of things, and we haven't really seen much phishing coming in through Teams. The number one source of phishing or any sort of infiltration we still see is email, because we can't reduce our reliance on it no matter how hard we try. In fact, the amount of emails that have been sent during 2020 was just outrageously higher. I don't have that stat offhand, but it's disgusting how many emails we sent in 2020. Yay, pandemic. So I'm going to start by identifying a specific user that I want to attack. Oops, you know what? Forgive me a moment while I switch to old school presentation mode because my slides aren't showing exactly the way that I want them to. And it will make life a little easier for when we need to get into a demo together too. Okay, so we've got our goal. We're an attacker, and we want to target one specific person. Why is my animation failing me here? Okay. There we go. This is what it's supposed to look like. We are going to send a mass phishing email to all sorts of individuals within an organization. I'm going to find every email address of contoso.com that I possibly can, and I'm just going to hit everything. Everyone in the organization I possibly can get an email address on. Why? Because I literally don't care whose account I gain access to. Now, if I happen to gain access to the finance officer's account, fantastic. But chances are the finance officer got some really good training from IT about how to avoid phishing emails. But maybe this guy Jack, who might be an intern or just somebody who wasn't as targeted and didn't think that the security training that they had to go through was as important, they open my email, they click the link. Well, what does that make Jack to me? Jack's a dummy. I'm now Jack. As Jack now, I have access to the company intranet, and I have access to the company directory. I very immediately find out that Jill and Bob are members of the finance department that manage payments. I go through the intranet site that talks about how to pay vendors, because everybody in the organization at Contoso needs to know how that works. It's general information that's accessible to everybody. It's on the intranet page. And as Jack, I'm just roaming the intranet page taking a look for that. Well, I find out that Jill and Bob are my targets here. Jill approves vendor payments up to $25,000, and Bob manages those vendor payments. Jill and Bob, though, I'm going to guess, are pretty aware of their cybersecurity training. In fact, I could look it up if I wanted to inside the system, figure out more about them, do a little social engineering about them outside, look at their LinkedIn profiles, things like that, like maybe a certification of I took my security training that they posted on Facebook. Either way, I'm now Jack. And as Jack, I can much more easily phish Jill and Bob. Or if I need to, I can hop from Jack to another person that Jill and Bob might trust a little bit more. Because when you get an email from somebody within the organization, you're a lot more likely to click on things and accept it. What does the security training always jump on? What does it always press to our end users? Watch for unverified email addresses and bad links and weird domains and things like that. And emails from people you wouldn't normally expect. Well, if we already have access to somebody inside the organization, a lot of that is null and void in terms of training. So as Jack, I send phishing emails to Jill and Bob and get them to click those links. And now I've got Jill and Bob. Jack, he's useless to me. I'm done with his account. Whatever. I throw away the keys. Doesn't matter. I go through Jill and Bob's information, and I find out that number one, Jill, when she's approving, uses an automated workflow. It's pretty simple. She gets a notification. She has to click approve. And Bob creates the payment request that Jill approves. Now, it looks like he can do it anytime he wants to, but I look through the history, and I can see that Bob normally does it on Tuesdays. So what am I going to do to get my money? I'm going to submit a payment request as Bob. I'm going to suppress any notifications by setting up a simple inbox rule on Bob's account. I'm going to approve and request the trigger automatic payment as Jill. And then I'm going to repeat it every Tuesday and scurry when I lose access to the environment. Keep repeating this over and over and over and over again. Somebody brought up a great point in the chat. Not the person who says I worked for Microsoft and completely failed at PowerPoint, or at least that's what I infer. But the individual who just said that about inside users, those phishing attacks that go from one user inside to another aren't usually going through any anti-spam or phishing since they're technically trusted. Yes, normally. However, we're going to talk about some Microsoft technologies that can actually help with that when we get a little bit later in. We're doing the fun part right now, which is all about, well, how this actually happens. So I walked you through a very generic example. How does this actually happen? We're going to try a full attack here. This is the part that might work, it might not. It's very exciting. There are 5 stages of an attack that we're going to look at and how they work. We're going to look at how an attacker is going to target your organization during these 5 stages and how you can prevent that from actually happening. So first up, we've got our attack recon stage. So our recon stage is reconnaissance. It is an attacker figuring out everything about your organization that they possibly can before even attacking you. They're going to look at who is your organization, what do you do, who are your partners, things like that. What services do you use? Do you use Microsoft services? Do I need to do an MX lookup? I probably am, to figure out where does your email immediately route to? Is it going straight to Office 365 Advanced Protection? Is it going to something like a proof point, so on and so forth? What am I looking to get from you? Do I want data? Do I want money? Do I want to just sit there and figure it out once I'm inside? And which user account do I need to get to? As we talked about in the previous example, you may not know yet. Now, there are a few different ways to do this to recon a company. First of all, I'm going to start Googling and Binging your company like crazy, figuring out everything I can. I'm going to look on your website. I'm going to look at your board of directors and your senior leadership. I'm going to look them up on Facebook and LinkedIn and everything I can. I'm going to look at password dumps to try to find their name. Maybe they reused a password. Oh, that's an easy way in. But let's say I want to do something more simple. Let's say I'm an amateur hacker and I just want to see, how do I find out some information? So we're going to bring over a Windows Sandbox environment to make it clear that I am doing this from a protected area. Windows Sandbox, if you're not familiar, is a sandbox VM that you could spin up on your Windows machine on Windows 10 to do things in a sandbox that won't affect your regular machine and won't get me in trouble for using my computer to do potentially malicious things. I'm literally not going to look for a bad tool right now. I'm literally just I'm going to search this right now. Find email addresses by domain. There are like a billion tools out there to do this. Why? Because marketing people love to say, okay, I want to target this company and get them to buy my stuff. And I'm going to send emails to everybody I possibly can. So they look. There are free tools. There are paid tools. Nah, I don't want to do that one. And it was just, that was an ad. Mails Hunt. I think I've used this one in a demo before. And I am going, we have to do this with a real public domain out there because it's just going to crawl the internet for everything it can. But I am going to do this on our own Minnesota Microsoft 365 user group. No, I'm not a robot. Let me in. Oh, okay, chimneys. Let's group exercise, everybody. There's a chimney. There's a chimney. I think I got them all. Yay! And we let it run. Well, this website's taking its time.
Okay,
What are the key changes that we've seen come through the Message Center this week? And what do we need to
No email address is found. Well, let's try an old domain we used to use. 0365mn.org. Okay, yeah, I'm not a robot again. Why would I have to prove that twice? Now we're a very small organization. We've got like 12 Office 365 accounts. But I can actually already see that this one tool, this hunter.io, already found our sponsors at 0365MN email address. If you're interested in sponsoring the user group, send us an email at that address. Well, immediately I already have an email that I can go ahead and try to con against. It's that easy to try to look things up. There are more malicious style tools that we can use. I'm not going to make recommendations of anything like that, but this we did with binging a simple phrase of find email address by domain. If you're an actual experienced hacker, you've got tools to do this that are going to crawl the web much better than these paid tools that are for marketers. And you've got much sketchier tools as well. Somebody just said we should be using Maltego. Yes, Maltego Teeth is one of the most popular tools that's used for this. I am not going to demonstrate it though. Gets into gray area of me doing that as a badged Microsoft employee. So, how do you defend yourself against reconnaissance? How do you defend yourself of finding information about you and your company? You literally can't. I highly discourage you from wasting your time on this, because you may decide, okay, we're not going to publish this information on our website, and here's our social media use policy and all that sort of fun stuff. But I promise you, everybody's going to post their position on LinkedIn. It's just that information is going to be out there. People are going to sign up for newsletters using your company's email address. It's all going to happen. So you can't defend yourself from reconnaissance. That's the most important thing that we should be talking about. The next thing. We're an attacker. Now it's time to do an initial breach. So we've got a few ways that we can try to do this. We've got password spray attacks, which is us we've got now a list of email addresses from whatever tool we might have used, whether it's Maltego Teeth, whether it was just looking by Googling online. It's time to spray a bunch of passwords. Password spray, for those who aren't familiar, is taking a bunch of common passwords and hitting your organization and trying to see if any of them match. We've got brute force, where we're targeting in individual accounts and trying over and over and over again. We've got social engineering and phishing attacks, where I am going to send some sort of phishing style email to these specific people, maybe using a little bit of social engineering by looking up information on their Facebook or their LinkedIn or things like that. And we've got password reuse. If I find anything from any of these password dumps, which are not hard to get access to, I can find password reuse. Now I'm going to show you a tool that was developed to do self-pen testing called Mail Sniper. This is not an official Microsoft tool. It's an open source tool on GitHub. And we're going to test it together. So here, you'll see here I went to the Mail Sniper GitHub repo. I've already downloaded it and gotten everything set up on my computer. It's actually a PowerShell script. It's pretty simple. Although, you know, simple for PowerShell. How many lines we got here? 5,100 lines of code. there's a lot of things that it can do. It can help you do password sprays. It can help you do get GAL information from an organization, global mail search, help you with finding folders and getting usernames and things like that. All sorts of really interesting stuff. But we're going to do a password spray attack. We're not looking to get the global address list. We are actually looking to password spray against a certain endpoint. We could do something like OA, or we could do something like EWS. Depends on what endpoints are available and which ones are not, and what kind of exchange situation you're in, whether you're on-prem, whether you're in Office 365, things like that. So let's go ahead and build out a couple text files. From this point on, we're not using the user group's domain. We're not actually going to try to attack the user group because that just doesn't seem very nice. What we are going to do is use a demo tenant that I have already set up. So let's create a usernames file. Let's user list. And let's just grab a couple accounts from my demo tenant here. Again, not real users. Nobody report me or get mad at me. Let's take the Adele Vance account. Alex Wilbur's account. And Bianca's account. Let's say those are the ones we found online. We likely would find a lot more if this is a real organization, but we're pretty set to go here. Now, all I have to do is invoke this PowerShell commandlet to password spray a specific password. Now, let's be stupid. Let's take Alex's account, and I'm going to set his password. Let's say Alex did this on his own. And Alex put in a dumb password of, let's show it here, Contoso with a 0 at the end and an exclamation point. Oh yeah, thanks Microsoft 365. Real strong password. Alex's password is now set to that terrible password. Maybe we got it from a list of commonly used passwords. Maybe we were able to figure it out based on the organization name and some trickery there. Maybe we found it in a password dump. Regardless of what it is, it's now time to run our mail sniper. So I've got it loaded up in Visual Studio Code here. So let's get to our proper directory here. Downloads, mail sniper, mail sniper. Okay, we're going to run the mail sniper utility. And I'm proud to say I do not run this nearly often enough to actually know this by heart. But we're going to invoke a password spray. That should have worked. Oh. Might have to run it here first. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to add it to the top. Let's collapse my functions. It's a nice little walkthrough of all of the possible things that we can do with a tool like this, which is, again, just leveraging existing functionality. All right, so here is our parameters of everything we are going to do. All right. So at the very end of our script, I'm going to give it an invoke password spray. We've got Exchange Active Sync. We've got OA. We've got EAS. Let's start with EWS here. So first thing first is our Exchange hostname, which is going to be outlook.office365.com. We've got our user list, which is going to be at C users WDay, utility account, documents, and there's our user list.txt. Next thing we're going to do is give it a password. We're cheating a little bit here. We happen to know the password. And that is Contoso with a 0 at the end and an exclamation point. And I'll give it an out file of sprayed results.txt. Let's see if this works. I'm going to run the script again. Save it real quickly. All right, it says it finished. Let's go and look at our spray results. And there we go. It has found a successful match for a password. Alex Wilbur at alexw@m365.onmicrosoft.com. We found it with that specific password. We have Modern Auth enabled, everybody. Modern Auth is not going to save you. We are seriously good to go. If you got EWS open, if you got OWA turned on, which I hope you do, if you got any of this stuff turned on, you are subject to potentially being attacked like this. So we just did that. How do we defend against that? Well, we can defend against a lot of it, a lot of this. Number one, by testing yourself. If you've got Office 365 Advanced Threat Protection, you can spearfish yourself, brute force password attack yourself, or password spray attack yourself with the built-in tools. Next, multi-factor authentication. If MFA had been turned on for Alex's account, I would not have been able to validate that password. Just end of story, donezo. Yes, there are ways around MFA. If he had had MFA turned on with SMS authentication, I could do a lot more work and potentially get in by impersonating him, calling Verizon and saying, you know, swap the SIM card, things like that you might have heard of. But MFA is the one thing you can do. Next up, set up things like disabling basic auth, your failed logon policies, your phishing protections. Put those in place. Make sure on your Windows machines you've got Lapse and Credential Guard in place. And use a threat finder, which is what I was just showing you here inside of ATP to protect yourself. Somebody put a good tip in the chat. That in their opinion, with MFA, it's best to disable the click to approve option if using the Microsoft Authenticator app. The click to approve is just too easy for an end user to blindly approve without thinking about it much. They've spoke with other peers who've been compromised, other peers that have been compromised that way. That's absolutely true. There is a Microsoft Authenticator option where the end user just gets a prompt saying, would you like to approve? More recently, there's a new way that the authenticator can do it that gets around that #1 issue. Instead of the user on the website, whatever they're trying to log into, getting just a little dialogue that says your mobile device is getting notification, click yes or click approve, and then the mobile device getting approved. On the web page, it will say your mobile device will get a notification for you to approve. Click this number, and it will be a 2-digit number. Let's say it says 61. On the mobile device, 3 numbers will pop up, 3 2-digit numbers, and the user will have to select the right one. It's a small extra effort for the user that's actually trying to properly get in, but it really stops people in their tracks from just clicking approve automatically. Make sure to look into that and get that set up. That's what we use here at Microsoft. Okay. Next up, it's time to elevate our privilege. Back with our fun little Jack and Jill and John exercise, we talked about once you're in as Jack, doesn't matter who Jack is, you've got access to the internet, you've got access to the directory, you've got access to all sorts of that stuff. Well, what are we going to want to do? Number one, we want to enumerate the directory, find out everybody else in the directory, because, hey, that's a bunch of other email addresses that we could password spray both inside of the organization from the account we just got into, Alex Wilbur, or we could try attacking them from the outside if we need to for some reason. We're going to find our admins. It is 100% possible for everybody in your directory to find out who the admins are in your tenant and the admin roles. We're going to look at DNS records, try to see if there's any other way in. We're going to try to get local admin privileges on workstations. We're going to password spray other people's accounts. Maybe somebody else was dumb enough to use that Contoso password. So let's take a look at demoing some of these methods. So we've got tons of different things that we can do inside of Mail Sniper. But before we go into this high code option, let's explore something else. So I'm going to open yet another Edge window in a new profile. Let's go in private here. And I'm going to go to aad.portal.azure.com. For anybody who doesn't know the short link, it's a short link to your Azure AD portal. Now, if you have your Microsoft tenant set up with the default settings, anybody is able to get into this portal. They're not able to actually do anything, but getting in is a problem in and of itself. So let's try this here. Where was our handy dandy password? Okay, so there's my username that I got out from our password spray. So my bad attacker, I'm going to go in and I'm going to use that. And there's our password. Where are all of my proper windows? There we go. Anybody ever have problems with too many Edge windows open? So there are pros and cons to having this accessible, but I don't have many personal pros to having this accessible to your end users. There is the nice ability that they can register enterprise applications and things like that from here if they need to for some reason. But again, I would prefer that that be left to an admin role at any organization that really needs to worry about security. So again, I am not an admin in the organization, but I can very simply look at everybody in my directory. I can pull up Adele's profile. I can see the groups that she's in. I can see her administrative units, as in, what admin roles does she have? I can see just about everything that I could possibly want to see as an attacker. This is my wonderland as an attacker. You just gave me, you didn't give me a text-based directory. You make it so easy for me. You gave me a visual interface to use. So yes, if I were you, I'd probably disable end users from getting in here, which is a setting you can do. I can look at getting you a link to that in the chat. But I want to add a filter here and administrative unit. I guess I don't have any AUs in this environment, but I do want to look up administrative roles. Let's see if we can do that through here. Nah, I can't, but let's say I'm browsing through and I find this MOD administrator. Well, that sure sounds like an administrator. And I scroll through their information. I should be able to find somewhere in here their assigned roles. Oh, MOD administrator is a global admin. Well, there's a great target for me to try to get access to somebody. So enough people in the chat are bringing this up. Let me show you real quickly how to disable access to this portal for your end users. So I'm now logged in as my global admin. Let's go into our Azure AD Admin Center. We'll go to Azure Active Directory. And you'll have to forgive me, I'm going to do a little bit of clicking around here. It's been a while since I've done this. Here we go. You click on User Settings, and you can restrict access to the Azure AD Administration portal. You turn that to yes, and no users will be able to get into that portal again. That only restricts access to the portal. And there's a reason why it doesn't restrict access to other things, because everything else is stored back in APIs, whether it be Graph API, Exchange APIs, things like that, and it's leveraged by Microsoft applications. So I, as Alex Wilbur, do need to be able to quote unquote enumerate the directory for a lot of applications I use. My profile should be able to do that, but that then exposes me being able to get to information. So yes, this is the easy way to get access, but there are other ways to get access. I'm not sure if we necessarily are going to take the time to do that today through Mail Sniper, but if I open back up our wonderful handy dandy Mail Sniper guide, if we find out what window that was in, we've got a bunch of different ways to do that. So, accessing the global address list. So, we can run get global address list or get AD username from EWS, but let's get the global address list. So, bring that over here. Get global address list. So I'm gonna, in my PowerShell scriptlets, comment out that line. And let's run a get global address list. Host name, outlook.office365.com. What other commands is this one gonna look for? It wants my username. Luckily enough, I found that earlier. And yes, we could have PowerShelled all this to run one after the other. What other parameters is it going to want? Oh, it just wants an out file. Wonderful. Out file gal.txt. Run. Logging into OWA. It failed. Find people failed. Oh, EWS endpoint worked. And here comes our global address list. Somebody asked, would disabling Exchange Online PowerShell access prevent this mail sniper attack? Yes, it would prevent mail sniper specifically. It would not prevent other forms of attack. So other forms of attack might hit EWS directly. They might hit Graph API. There are a lot of endpoints, and you're going to chase them around and around. Identity security is, again, your best bet. MFA will stop the user from getting in the front door, and we won't even be able to do this. That is literally the number one thing you can do. But yes, you can go and disable other access endpoints and things like that. So we're not going to go through all of the different modules necessarily today of Mail Sniper, because again, this is not a demo of Mail Sniper, just showing you how easy it is without some basic security policies put in place for us to enumerate a directory, for us to get access, things like that. There are a ton of different modules. We're getting a global address list right now. You can get mailbox folders. You can search for mail options globally. There's even a demo script to look for credit card numbers, look for default terms, download attachments, all sorts of things like that. Let's look at the outcome here. Here we've got our gal list now. And with the options we ran it with, it just pulled email addresses. But we can pull so much more information. We can pull all AD profile information. And then we can do a lot on top of that. So there's a good question in the chat about, can I comment on limiting Azure AD portal access via PowerShell or Visual Studio or Graph API for normal users? The pop-out help on that toggle you showed lists this exception. Yes, restricts all non-administrators from accessing any Azure AD data in the administration portal, but does not restrict access using PowerShell or another client such as Visual Studio. So that is a good question. I'm going to have to paste stuff in the chat for you guys after this so that you have access to more of that information, and I'll post some of that on my Twitter if you want to give me a follow there, or just check out the Cloud Sherpa in the next day. We won't have enough time to dive into all of those today. Somebody asked, how would somebody know what? How would you know what somebody pulled? For example, like what I just pulled right here. You wouldn't. There would be logs of my access to the EWS endpoint just now, and importantly, my failed attempts. If we scroll back up here, my failed attempts to get to people method and to get into OWA. There's going to be a failed OWA login event there as well. Those are things that using Cloud App Security you can take action on. But let's, on that note, talk about how you can defend yourself from this elevation of privilege sort of situation. Again, MFA is going to defend you from me trying to escalate myself to the next account. If you at least have MFA on these other accounts, I can't get access to them. If we go back to that example of where I'm escalating myself from Jack to Jill and Bob. If Jill and Bob have MFA turned on, I don't have an option to get beyond Jack. Now, me getting in as Jack anyways is pretty bad. It's not going to be helpful. I'm at least going to get something. It may not be extremely valuable. But MFA, least privilege-based access. How many global admins do you have in your environment? Don't actually tell me. I don't want to know. But the more global admins you have, the more potential admin accounts I can get access to. And once I get an admin account, that's really not good. Just-in-time access for your admins, so that there aren't permanently assigned admin roles. That's one of Microsoft's best practice guidances, is there should not be permanently assigned admin roles to most people. They should be able to request admin access, which will require approval or a multi-factor authentication prompt. If you're going to use permanently assigned admins with alt accounts, don't have it be something like ADM underscore the username. Make it hard to guess names. Again, lapse in your local machines and monitor admin activity, because admin activity is where we really can get in trouble. What if the activation takes 45 minutes and everyone is pissed every time they need it? If you're using our just-in-time access technologies as a part of Azure AD and it's taken 45 minutes, that's not how it's supposed to work. I've got a shared environment where I do this on a, not extremely often basis, but often enough that I use it probably once every couple weeks, and it takes me, 5 minutes to go through. It's not convenient for sure, but it's there. It's important. Mostly the universal print roles. I unfortunately am not smart enough to comment on that. Sorry. All right, well, let's move on because we got more to talk about here. Next up, it's entrenchment. Now we are in the environment. If we were lucky enough to get access to an admin account, I'm going to create alt accounts. I'm going to set up accounts for myself to really make it sticky. I'm going to get my fingers in every area of the environment that I can, so that if you catch me somewhere, potentially you're not going to catch me everywhere. Or if you know that I'm lots of places, it's going to be a cat and mouse game. I'm going to set up impersonation. I'm going to set up delegate permissions. I'm going to create inbox rules to make sure whatever I'm doing inside of these inboxes is pretty much invisible to the end user so that they don't know to report anything to you. There are so much stuff I can do, and I can automate almost all of this if you give me access to any of the APIs. How do we prevent against entrenchment? You need to monitor. You need to prevent mail forwarding rules. You need to look at all your tenant rules, forms, things like that. Take a hard look at all that stuff. I want to actually just bring up one thing from the chat. Somebody just brought up that Microsoft Privileged Identity Management works well for them, and it's just an extra step for admins. Benefits far outweigh the small inconvenience. Everybody, thank you for that. I agree with you, and this is not a product that I work on as part of engineering. I just happen to personally like it, and I think it offers a high value. Everyone should be using some sort of privileged identity management just-in-time access scenario. Because I promise you, not all of your admins are using it on a daily basis. Now, if your admin uses their admin roles on a daily basis, their L1, L2 support or something like that, maybe the inconvenience does outweigh the benefits, and maybe it is proper for them to have constant admin access. There's arguments both ways on that. But my favorite example is the CIO or director of IT. And please forgive me if any of you are CIOs or directors of IT on this call. I'm not trying to call anybody out. But in my experience, the CIO or director of IT doesn't often actually need to use admin privileges. But they should have them available to them to go look at things, to do investigations, maybe things that that are confidential, that can't be told to anybody else within the organization. There's legitimate reasons why they should need to have admin privileges. But do they need them all day long, every day? No. Probably just small scenarios, one-offs. And those C-levels and directors of IT are prime attack targets. Those are perfect people for privileged identity management. Perfect people for it. So take a look at that. We're going to take a look at demoing Secure Score and things like that, whatever we have time for once we're done talking about these different ways. Tommy brought up a good point. Maybe they just need global reader access to see things, as opposed to actually do things. Global reader can be dangerous too, though. Just keep that in mind. Not as dangerous. But if you've ever looked at Secure Score, have you seen that preventing mail forwarding rules is like the #1 thing that they recommend doing from an exchange side to improve your Secure Score? Mail forwarding rules are a bad thing for the organization. From a security side, it is one of the most popular ways to do deep entrenchment when we're in phishing using a mail forwarding rule. And from a compliance side, letting that information go outside of the organization is just a bad thing. Somebody asked, when I say mail forwarding, do I mean both external and internal? I mean end user driven mail forwarding rules. So if you're an Exchange admin, you can set up a transport rule or a mailbox setting to forward mail from one address to another. That's fine, because that's happening at the admin level. Now we're praying that your attacker doesn't get access to an admin account. When an end user sets up a mail forwarding rule, that's generally not a great sign. It's either a security issue, or you might want to be worried about that from a compliance issue. Now, because I work with the education industry a lot, I know this is a hot topic with arguments on both sides for education, that a lot of students aren't going to check their university email and they'll want it forwarded to their personal email address. Well, it's really up to you on what kind of policies you want to set there. Because remember, students are just like employees when it comes to accounts. They have access to the GAL just like anybody else. One final stage of our attack, and it's exfiltration. At this point, I have access to the accounts. I have access to all sorts of information to figure out what I need to grab and when I'm going to grab. Exfiltration usually happens smash and grab after a lengthy recon, although it can happen with a trickle effect like we showed in our earlier demonstration of every week I'm going to submit a request and have it auto-approved. Exfiltration, you got to protect your data. If data is what the attacker's after, DLP, Microsoft Information Protection, all sorts of policies like that are going to help protect your data. Monitor your audit log with CloudApp Security for cross mailbox search queries, and monitor for gateway mechanisms like impersonation, which CloudApp Security can do as well. Okay, let's talk about defense, how we can use EMS and Microsoft 365 tools to defend ourselves. EMS has built up a lot of different things, and this slide, I'll admit, is a little old. Half these products have been renamed to Microsoft Endpoint Manager, Azure Active Directory, CloudApp Security, Threat Analytics, and Microsoft Information Protection. Those are the key components that are part of EMS that are going to protect. Step 1, protect yourselves. Set up conditional access. Now, you may not own much of the conditional access suite. It depends on what your Microsoft 365 licensing or Azure AD licensing or EMS licensing is. I'm not a licensing expert, and nor do I ever want to be one. But we talked about MFA a few times, about how important it is to put MFA into a place. Who here likes having MFA on their account, and every time they try to log in, you get an MFA prompt? Raise your hands in the chat, or give me a reaction. Well, either you're all sleeping or nobody likes having it on all the time. End users like it even worse. Somebody said it makes me feel secure, and you know what? I like that. I like the honesty. And somebody said they liked it as well. Well, from the IT perspective, it does help us feel a little bit more secure, a lot of us. But our end users sure don't like it. So I want to take you through an example. I have a friend named Kate. Kate works for a large organization in, let's say, Chicago. Kate's company in Chicago last year implemented multi-factor authentication for all their accounts because they listened to our guidance and thought they thought, you know what, we need to be more secure. We're turning on multi-factor authentication for everybody. Well, now Kate, every time she wants to get access to anything, whether it's on her work computer or on her mobile device or on her personal computer, she has to do an MFA prompt. Kate doesn't carry her phone around a lot, very much, so she has to run over to different areas of the house to get her phone to do the MFA prompt, and at work it's just annoying. And Kate's trying to collaborate on a new project for her company, where they're trying to develop a new product, and she's just trying to share some files back and forth with people using OneDrive and SharePoint and Teams. But it's getting so frustrating. And so one day, Kate's on her mobile phone. She gets a text from a coworker saying, "Hey, can you share the project plan document with me?" And Kate just has had enough of MFA, and she just decides, you know what? I'm going to just send this through Gmail because I've got it on my phone and whatever. And she sends it to the wrong address, and now we're screwed. That information is gone. It was on a mobile device. It didn't have information protection on it. And the company's efforts to enforce MFA on Kate actually had the exact opposite desired effect. It caused a compliance and security issue because we forced her to use a non-approved tool because we made our own tools too hard to use. This is where conditional access is so key. Conditional access, we can set up the most basic things. We can say, is this a managed device? Yes. Okay, then we're good to go. Kate's mobile device should be enrolled in Intune, and she should be good to share, to do applications and to log into content without an MFA prompt every single time. Potentially, it's up to the company to determine that. Maybe it's based on her device state or where she's logging in from in terms of location. Maybe it's based on the sensitivity of the application she's trying to access. It's all up to the organization, but you should do some sort of conditional access to make MFA not over encumbering. Users should have a good sense that, oh, I'm getting an MFA prompt for a good reason. I'm logging in from a weird location. I'm logging in from my personal device that isn't meant for work. All sorts of things like that. So MFA, carte blanche, that's not a recommendation. MFA, conditional access, that's a good recommendation. A little bit more about MFA. It uses all sorts of controls that you can put into place. So a bunch of conditions, whether who the user is, what kind of device they're coming from, what app they're trying to access, where they are, and their off method. We then real-time evaluate the session risk, depending on your licensing, a machine learning algorithm, your policies that you've set up ahead of time saying, if this happens, then do this, and then create an effective policy to do one of a bunch of different things. We allow or block the access. That's the most obvious one. We set up limited access, allowed for specific applications like SharePoint to say, yeah, you can see this, but you can't print, copy, paste, or download. Require MFA, most obvious one. Force a password reset on their next compliant login, or force them to accept terms of use. So I love to see it in a semi-realistic scenario. A lot of people get confused by conditional access, and if you don't, you can zone out for 3 minutes here. But policies, we're going to do this in Batman terms. To access the Batcave, you should either have your Bat phone or be driving the Batmobile. Those seem like a couple valid ways to make sure that it's not just the Joker behind the Batman mask. To access the Bat computer, you should either have the Bat phone or be in the Batcave. So, you know, if somebody takes the Bat computer out of the Batcave and steals it, they shouldn't be able to just get access to all the resources that Batman has hidden away without the Bat phone as well, the multi-factor authentication, which in theory should also be behind some sort of MFA itself. Microsoft Authenticator, which is our authenticator app, which we strongly recommend using, has support for Face ID and Touch ID on iOS and the appropriate related methods on Android. Yes, I'm an iOS user. Everybody can live with it. And lastly, if an access attempt happens from Arkham Asylum, which if you don't know, Batman and DC Universe is the big prison for all the supervillains. Well, that's a bad thing. Somebody tried to log in, they had the password. Deny the login and force MFA on the next login and then make the person change their password because the password leaked. We can do all of that automated through conditional access and keep the Joker out. What if Batman walked home and Joker stole his bat phone? Well, unless Joker can get by his facial authentication or thumbprint authentication, then no good. So, step 2, what's happening? We don't have time for a deep dive into cloud app security here today. Check out cloud app security. It integrates with your existing security, mobility, and encryption solutions and allows you to discover, control, and set up threat protection policies for all sorts of scenarios. It basically takes what we're used to in terms of like conditional access for identity, what we just talked through, and it takes it completely to the next level in terms of audit log events and data access and data controls and third-party system integration so that we can control, if you're using Dropbox as a system, which, you know, I wish you used OneDrive, but if you're using Dropbox, we can control the data in an identity layer at Dropbox through Cloud App Security. Heck, we can do the same thing with Google tools. And step 3 is to respond. Response, we hope you never have to get to this phase, but it's all about looking at the audit log and remedying situations as they happen. So our final section is going to be about looking forward, and my favorite thing to talk about, death to passwords. Everything we looked at today was based on getting in using passwords. There's password spray, where common passwords are used against a known account list. Breach replay, where we use stolen passwords from other sites, all of those password dumps, as I like to refer to them, and phishing, trying to trick users into handing over their passwords. Passwords are the problem. If you have passwords in use, which all of you do at this point, we do too, you have to use MFA. But we want to get rid of passwords altogether. And I'm going to talk to you about Microsoft's plan to do that. Let's actually move ahead a little bit here. These are just a few other slides that I had in terms of, you know, other ways to do password spray attacks. You know, the most common passwords. There's SMTP mail cracker tools that basically will do what I did with Mail Sniper through an application. But why do passwords suck? Well, let's talk about number 1. Password complexity rules don't help. What happens when you have a password complexity rule? Well, you as an IT person might actually do the right thing. You might use a password manager and create a very long, a long password that is from a password generator, something like that. Somebody said you write it down. Well, what most people do and what cyber criminals are very, very well aware of is people will make common substitutions. $sign for an S, @ for an A, I for an I, 1 for an I, 0 for a O, like we did in our example earlier. They'll add an exclamation point at the end. It's so common. Password complexity requirements don't help because users have found such a simple way around them, and it's so commonly used that the attackers know exactly what to look for. The common substitutions that an attacker needs to do If we were to combine that with Mail Sniper, the PowerShell script would take seconds longer. If anybody reads the XKCD comment, I hope you've seen this. And if not, this is a wonderful example of why passwords are so bad in terms of complexity requirements. And the key thing at the bottom that it says is, through 20 years of effort, we've successfully trained everyone to use passwords that are hard for us to remember, but are easy for computers to guess. So that ridiculous password at the top, Troubadour and 3, has 28 bits of entropy. And if we were doing 1,000 guesses per second with just random characters, not actually knowing anything going in, it would be pretty easy for a computer to guess it. It would take about 3 days. The user has no way to remember it. And if you have something stupid like correct horse battery staple, no special characters, no numbers, no capital letters. I know, like, former password security people are like, oh my God, no, that has none of the security. It's gonna take 550 years to guess that password. And it's way easier to remember. I'm comfortable saying this. I use this method for my Wi-Fi password, or passwords, I should say. Why? Because I remember them now. When somebody asks me for my guest Wi-Fi password, I don't have to go look up what ridiculous thing I did with numbers and symbols. It's literally all lowercase letters. Are any of you going to ever guess it or get into it? No. Should I have just told you it was all lowercase letters? Probably not, because now you know, if you were to brute force attack my Wi-Fi, you'd get through that. But don't worry, I have protection on there too. Next thing, password expiration does way more harm than good. I have worked for Microsoft for a little over 2 years now. I've had the same password since the day I started. Why do I have the same password since the day I started? Well, it's because of what would have happened if they had forced me to change my password. I would have added a 1, and then I would have changed the 1 to a 2, and the 2 to a 3. And I'm not going to ask you all to admit it. I'm sure there's a bunch of you in the chat who are going to say, no, I wouldn't do this, but I'm going to say most people do that exact thing. And we're the IT people. Imagine what the end users do. Password expiration does nothing good. Longer passwords also aren't necessarily better in terms of requirements, that is. Why? Because when you choose a 16-character password requirements, people repeat their characters. They increase the chance of users writing them down, as somebody brought up in the chat, reusing passwords, and storing them unencrypted on their PC, or writing it down, as somebody else brought up in the chat. So, longer passwords don't help either. So, NIST, which is National Institute of Standards and Technology, with the US Department of Commerce, but pretty internationally recognized, has given 3 major password guidance changes to organizations. No more periodic password changes, no more imposed password complexity, but validate your passwords against commonly used passwords. And we're here to help with that. Well, we now have technology built into Office 365, and that even can check and work with AD on premises to look for passwords that are easy for people to guess. I didn't have it set up in the demo tenant when we did it earlier here today, but we've put together a password guidance document for you at aka.ms/password guidance that will give you the guidance that you need to properly set up your password policies. We've done it, you can do it, I promise. In the meantime, take a look at our dynamic band password support. It prevents use of commonly attacked passwords, prevents use of common substrings. It normalizes common substitutions. So if a user tries to change an S to a $, we're going to be like, no, that's also bad. It's the same darn thing, because the attacker will do that. Check out, what did I have here? Check out your sign-in rights policies, and set up your attack detection and account marking. Pretty simple to do, all at that password guidance site. And I am out of time, I believe. So if you want to get in touch with me, my email address is max.fritz@microsoft.com, and Twitter is the Cloud Sherpa. I hope to help any of you in any way I can, and hope you had a great day. I believe there's a closeout session. Doug or Connor, correct me if I'm wrong.
I don't.
There is not.
There's not? Okay. Well, I am the end of your day. It is 4 o'clock here in Minnesota. The sun is kind of still out in Minneapolis. Go get some. Go enjoy a wonderful weekend.
Awesome. Thank you.